Israel got everything they wanted from America. Miriam Adelson could not be unhappy about anything Donald Trump did to help Israel. But at the end of the day, Israel got beat. This is a Hamas victory. A lot of people don't recognize it as such, but Israel had to agree to terms that were dictated and have been dictated by Hamas since the very beginning of this crisis.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another episode on TMJ's Political Current podcast. For over 2 years now, Washington has financed and politically shielded Israel through one of the most devastating wars, the Israel war in Gaza. But now suddenly, the US has brokered a peace deal, a ceasefire deal that is aiming through a 20-point plan to finally bring peace to the region. Now, many are hailing this as a breakthrough, but others who have read history and who know how this has worked previously think that there are more questions than answers that this deal is providing. So today I'm speaking to former UN weapons inspector and geopolitical analyst Scott Ritter. He's going to help me answer some critical questions that are not really being explored in the media. One of them being, first of all, why are there now US troops on the ground in Israel? How is this ceasefire going to proceed in its next phase, which involves the governance of Gaza? And the last one, and possibly the most important, being, is this really about preventing the death and destruction, or is it just a new evolved version of the Greater Israel Plan? Thank you so much, Mr. Ritter, for joining us again on TMJ News. And the latest updates that we have from this US brokered ceasefire deal is that the first stage of the ceasefire is being completed as we speak. The hostages are being released, but we know at the same time that historically we can't always trust that the ceasefires will hold. We know that Israel has violated countless ceasefires, not just in Gaza, but also in places like Lebanon. This next sensitive phase that concerns how Gaza will be governed and how that will look like moving forward. Can you walk us through how you predict this next phase is going to unfold?
How I predict. Well, this is where you get in trouble as an analyst who does predictive analysis, because your heart wants one thing to happen, your brain's saying something else. I also have to trust the Hamas leadership in that they wouldn't have charged blindly into this deal with an understanding that Israel was going to 100% break the deal. We don't know what assurances were given Hamas by the United States through intermediaries or directly. We don't know too much about how this came to be. Donald Trump has said that he is going to be the guarantor of this agreement, but Donald Trump's word is meaningless. We've seen that in the past. In the way Benjamin Netanyahu is speaking about, the next phase, disarmament, and he's going to order the IDF to come in, and it just appears that this deal is meant for Israel to break. Israel will say things such as Hamas isn't disarming, but it's curious. On the airplane to Israel last night, I guess when Trump was asked about how Hamas was cleaning house, so to speak, against Israeli-backed militias and groups, he said, well, he supports this, that Hamas, that there needs to be police, there needs to be enforcement of laws, and that the president wasn't opposed to this. So it'll be interesting to see how Israel handles this reality going forward, because once you greenlight policing, you're not just greenlighting policing, you're greenlighting Hamas's legitimate role in policing, which means you're greenlighting Hamas's legitimate role in the continuance of governing. There are just so many inherently contradictory things taking place right now. Trump has put in so much political capital into this. This is his legacy. This is his reputation. And if, one of the underlying themes that exists that heavily influenced, I believe, this um, peace agreement, whatever we want to call it, ceasefire agreement. It's supposed to be more than that. This is supposed to be all encompassing, once in 3,000 year opportunity to bring an end to the conflict in the Middle East. And that's
Yeah.
the way Donald Trump has sold this. This isn't just a ceasefire. This is it, baby. This is it. From here on in, there will be no more war. Donald Trump has
Grand
declared the
plan.
war to be over. Um, and gosh, I would like that to be true. I really would like that to be true. But then there's Netanyahu and the Israelis in reality. And, you know, is Trump needs to know, and so does Netanyahu, though, that there are many Americans that are just fed up with Israel. I mean, this is the theme that's sort of missing from all this, is that this is a Hamas victory. A lot of people don't recognize it as such, but Israel had to agree to terms that were dictated and have been dictated by Hamas since the very beginning of this crisis. And on the disarmament, Hamas has said that they will disarm, but my understanding is that it's conditional and they will disarm as a resistance movement. This isn't the first time Hamas has put disarmament on the table. I mean, they've mentioned it in the past. There are conditions that would have to exist. One of which is, if you're no longer going to be a resistance movement, that means that you've achieved your goal and objective of a Palestinian state. And so the resistance movement doesn't need to exist. Now, how do we bridge this? I think we have the answer: the Hamas police force. I mean, I just think there's compromises that have been made by the United States. One which has been recognized de facto, meaning that the president said, "Here's my 20 points," and Hamas came back and said, "Here's a 21st point modification." The president went, "Love it, baby, we're in." And that implies that the president agrees that Hamas ain't going away, that Hamas will be part of the government. And the Israelis' fears will play out, because I can tell you right now that politically, there's not a Palestinian, in my opinion, there's not a Palestinian political entity that can compete with Hamas today in terms of legitimacy. No, Mohammed Abbas did not bring this about. Fatah did not bring this about. Hamas brought this about, and the Palestinian people of Gaza brought this about. And the Palestinian people of the West Bank. The Palestinian people paid the heaviest price possible. I mean, my God, we still don't know the numbers. They're pulling bodies out of the rubble, but they paid this price. They earned this. And Hamas is the one that was there with them paying the price. The outcome is what Hamas said it was going to be: a pathway towards a Palestinian state. So I think Israel has every right to be concerned about the future, because I think the future is Hamas. However, I think saying the future is Hamas does not mean a future of violence. It doesn't have to be. It means a future where the political entity that is respected by the Palestinian people is given the opportunity to lead the Palestinian people. And then one thing we've learned, and you saw that, I don't know, again, I don't know if you agree with me on this one, but, watching Hezbollah over the years transition from a purely resistance movement into a political party, and how they had to soften many of their postures because they have to take into account not just resisting Israel, but governing the Lebanese people. And that requires a softer touch, that requires more compromise. I would imagine that Hamas would go through the same evolution, the transition from being a purely resistance movement. And of course, they're not, because they've been governing Gaza for some time now. Hamas, I believe, made a lot of its social reputations based upon the charities and the social work that it was doing in Gaza.
We know the US has poured billions into Israeli military operations, not just to sustain them, but also to make sure that they can continue for the long foreseeable future. They've allowed for the total destruction of Gaza. All of this has happened under US watch and fully under US protection and support. So how come now, after 2 years of utter death and destruction, we know the US is not just doing something out of the kindness of its heart? There's something they're trying to do, and I don't think it's always just about, hey, let's just have peace in the Middle East, because we know the influence of AIPAC in this country. I don't think Israel has any intention of stepping down. Like you mentioned right now, you mentioned resistance groups kind of over time evolving. Resistance group, one thing that's also telling about them is they're often and always almost a response to an aggressor. What do you think is changing right now? Why is this coming now?
Well, first of all, I think we need to point out that you say over the past 2 years. But the first part of that, the bulk of it, was the Biden administration. Different political reality, different political objectives, etc. And now we have the Trump administration, which can say, we didn't start this war. Therefore, we have a mission to bring this war to an end. It's our goal, it's our objective to bring this conflict to an end. What else changed? Look, Trump has linked Gaza and this peace agreement to Iran. I mean, he made a statement on the airplane last night that there wouldn't have been a peace deal in Gaza if the United States hadn't bombed and destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. Now, let's dig into this deeper, because the connectivity there is Israel. The connectivity is Israel feeling secure. It is superficial in the extreme. This peace deal is supposed to bring an end to October 7th like terrorism, and bombing Iran was supposed to bring an end to the Iranian nuclear threat that Benjamin Netanyahu was always running around. And when you have an Israel that feels secure, then you can have an Israel that might be willing to move down the path of peace. But it's more complicated than that. See, Israel set the conditions for victory being the total destruction of Hamas. Didn't happen, wasn't even close to happening. What happened was the total destruction of Gaza and the genocide of the Palestinian people, which then turned the world against Israel and started turning the American people against Israel. Israel lost across the board, economically isolated, militarily defeated, and politically subdued. And so now Israel can consider what they would never have considered, which is the peace deal that's on the table. The same thing with Iran. You know, Trump says we won, we bombed them in weakness. But the last time I checked, it was Israel that called Trump to beg for a ceasefire, because the Iranian missiles couldn't be stopped by the Israeli-American missile defense shield. And even though Israel delivered the Sunday punch to try and knock Iran out of the game, Iran was still standing. And today we have a situation where Israel lacks the capacity to do anything against Iran that doesn't trigger a massive retaliation that will possibly destroy Israel. So Israel has to be looking for peaceful outcomes. This is the difference. The difference is we have a chastened Israel. We have an Israel that has been defeated, not once, but twice. And they recognize the only path forward is a path that the United States will help get them on. Now, they claim victory, but everybody knows the truth. The other thing is what motivates the United States. Trump wants out of the Middle East. Miriam Adelson's $100 million ain't going to change that outcome. The national security strategy that's currently being considered by Pete Hegseth apparently calls for the United States to withdraw onto the Western Hemisphere, Fortress America. And this is the new national security priority of the United States. I think you're going to see, something similar in Ukraine, where we've given Ukraine, just like we did to Israel. You got everything you want, and you got beat. So now you got to accept peace on our terms. And that's what happened with Israel. Israel got everything they wanted from America. Miriam Adelson could not be unhappy about anything Donald Trump did to help Israel. But at the end of the day, Israel got beat. But I think that your question was, why now? How did we get to this now? And I think the difference is it's a completely different world under Donald Trump than it was under Joe Biden.
And I think that's true. But what I also think is true is I don't think the Israel lobby and the stronghold it has in America is going anywhere. I think it's very central, and it always has been, to how the United States operates, is this idea of Israel as essentially the US's arm in the Middle East, that idea of the only democracy in the Middle East, and really a Western stronghold in the region that is only seeking to expand. I mean, just, even few months ago, we were speaking about this Greater Israel plan and how this is something that they really do want to implement in the region, and nothing's going to stop them, essentially. But what this step now is reminding me, and I'd like your thoughts on it, is could this now be serving as the pretext for restructuring Gaza politically and essentially installing a leadership that is loyal to the West. I know one thing that is also happening is the discussion for an international stabilization force that would really be led by the US. So this is kind of like textbook, control again. How do you think this then would fit into what you're saying about the US kind of pulling out?
Again, who knows? Um, but let's just look at the politics of this. I think it was yesterday that people were talking about 200 American service members heading to the region to be part of
Yeah.
whatever. And Pete Hegseth immediately jumped in and said, no, 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 no. There's no American boots on the ground. None. It's just non-starter politically. Uh, we're heading towards a midterm, and, and that puts everything in perspective. I don't think Israel's going to get what they want on this one. I agree with you that they have a vision, but I don't see it happening unless you know something more about the Palestinian people that I don't. Meaning that they're going to be willing to be the subservient slaves of Israel in order to avoid being bombed. I don't think that's the way, but again, I'm an outside observer. I can't claim to have any special insight.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't have any special insight either, but what I do know that's already coming out, not just from the Palestinians, but people who have been protesting Israeli, aggression for decades there now, is this idea that the sentiment that a deal that is brokered by the US just based on what we know of the US and what it has done is what it has done in other countries in the region is generally not good news for the Palestinians. So yes, it's great news that there's a halt in the genocide, that there isn't, the killing and the destruction is stopping. But one thing that is also important is, will this lead to accountability for Israelis' crimes? Will it be an outcome that is to the benefit and to the interest of the Palestinians? Or will it just be another case of the US coming and saying, all right, guys, we want to come stop this, but essentially really creating a governance that could not care less about what the Palestinians themselves want?
Now, again, I would just say this. This is, again, I'm probably going to irritate a whole bunch of people by saying this. But if you think that there's going to be accountability for the Israeli crimes, you're just wrong. I know people want there to be accountability for the Israeli crimes. Israel will never be held accountable for what they've done. The whole purpose of this peace plan is to get Israel off that accountability path. You see, if Israel collapses, if Israel as a nation state dissolves because of its incompatibility with humanity, then there could be a pathway towards accountability, the same way we hunted down Nazis at the end of the Second World War. Although sometimes we didn't hunt them down, but we brought them in and made them heads of our rocket programs. But the, the but if the Israeli state continues to exist, um, what we're going to do is normalize the criminals, as we have always done in the past with other horrific criminals, including our own. We'll normalize them. And I think that's one of the things that's happening here with this peace plan, because this peace plan is supposed to bring to an end the ICJ's, case. It's going to, if this peace plan holds, that ICJ case is done. It's finished. It's not going forward. They'll sit on it for 7 years and they'll publish a memorandum that says, oops, nothing. And that's it. And the ICC, they'll drop it. They'll drop it in a heartbeat under pressure. But the United States isn't going to allow Israel, because if we allow Israel to be held to account, my God, what does it say about us? Because if you want a bigger criminal, again, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but it's the truth. You want the biggest criminal in the world today, it's the United States. We've committed crimes that make anything Israel did pale in comparison. We do things around the world in the name of freedom, democracy. Sometimes we just do it in the name of greed and we pretend it isn't happening, like the Congo. Um, and we look at Israel and we're like, that's why we do it. We don't do it necessarily because we're so friendly with Israel. We'll do it and say we can't allow a precedent to be set where nations start to be held accountable for acting on what they believe to be their national security interests. especially the United States. The best way to counter that is to make a Palestinian state that truly is independent, because then that's how you hold Israel accountable. Is every morning Israel has to wake up, look across, and see Palestinian people free, independent, not threatening, not committing terrorism, but living their lives free of Israeli occupation. That's the best revenge, is to do something that Israel said we'll never allow it to happen, and make it happen. Then the Israelis have to live with that. And that in some ways is a better punishment than bringing them to court and putting them in jail.
A question that's never asked is, well, who's going to de-radicalize the Israelis? Because, from their top officials to the settlers themselves, they've been spewing genocidal rhetoric for decades and getting away with it. Really, the people who have been murdering men, women, and children in Gaza every day without batting an eyelash and justifying it by saying these people need to be de-radicalized, even to the point of saying even their children and the babies in Gaza, they are also part of the problem. They're also not innocent because they're going to grow up and become radicalized. I mean, how can you that's just textbook radicalism. And no one wants to admit it, but these are deeply dark sentiments. I mean, I've seen interviews of, people going and talking to the Israelis saying, what do you think about what's going on? And they're like, what do you mean? Like, these people are brainwashed, they're radicalized. We need to do this. So that's something no one asks, but it's also a sentiment that's not going away. They're never going to see Palestinians as their equals. It's just not part of who they are. It's what's been keeping them justifying what they've been doing for so long. So do you ever see that changing?
You're just trying to get me in trouble this morning by asking me these questions, because I'm going to answer them. And the problem is I'm going to answer and I'm just going to alienate so many people, but so be it. I don't mean to alienate people, but nothing happens in a vacuum. Newton's third law of gravity applies to human behavior. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And at this stage in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I don't think it matters, other than for moral clarity, who's to blame. I personally believe that Israel's to blame. I believe the Nakba started this. People can go back in history and go back to Herzog and the original Zionism and the whole thing. Yes, it's a complicated story, and yes, we know that Zionism sought to steal the land of the Palestinian people, or the people who lived on this land from the very beginning. But today, given the violence that's gone back and forth, I think it doesn't matter what the genesis was. What matters is that we have Israelis and Palestinians who have been raised to hate Israelis and Palestinians. I despise Benjamin Netanyahu. I hope you know that. But I also listen to him, because you have to, to know your enemy. And I do view Benjamin Netanyahu as an enemy, not of the Palestinian people. That's their business, but as the American people. I don't view him as our friend. I don't view him as our ally. I view him as our enemy. But Israel, as things currently stand, will always be beholden to the American taxpayer, which will mean that Israel is always tied to the United States. And from a security standpoint, that has its pluses, but it has its minuses. What Netanyahu wanted was an Israel that could stand on its own feet economically. And by staying on its own feet economically, it could integrate itself into the neighborhood, into the region, in a way that took war off the table, because if everybody's making money, everybody's happy. And I think that because I think greater Israel is a process of radicalization. I think the greater Israel concept comes into the fold as a direct result of violence. There's an opportunity now for Israel to get on that track, to repair relations with the West, to get investment. Israel can't get investment in Israel if it continues to be this Ben Gvir, Smotrich, Palestinian hating greater Israel. The world has rejected that. Israel will have to become something else. Now, it will take time, but the path to de-radicalization, I believe, is best achieved by taking a path of economic stability. What can be done to bring economic stability to Israel and the region? And here's where Israel and Palestine have both common objectives, because they are neighbors. And, you have these gas fields Can they both be exploited simultaneous to the mutual benefit of both people? Up until now, the answer is no. Israel would never allow that to happen. But maybe now that could happen.
The US is now proposing, and a lot of these people who are crafting this are really like real estate people. They want, we know previously Trump had this dream for how Gaza would look like. When you have a situation like this where they're coming in, they're like, we're going to take care of everything. We're going to rebuild, we're going to take care of making sure this transitional government is successful. We'll, hell, we'll just come in and supervise it ourselves, make sure everything is, happening the way we want it to happen. So when we're speaking about neutrality, with the US, there is no neutrality. We know the US, in this scenario at least, is always going to be prioritizing Israeli interests. And Israeli interests right now, although, we can make an argument and say it's gotten to a point where it's just looking so bad for Israel on a global level. But still, and despite all of that, I don't think the US is ever going to give up on just that insane level of priority it always gives Israel. I don't think AIPAC is going anywhere. Um, and I think it's going to continue, possibly in a different way, possibly kind of evolved into some other way where people are like, oh, that's great. Now finally the killing has stopped. And it kind of lulls the population into accepting whatever comes next. It almost seems as though that's the trajectory we're moving toward.
Again, you're doing your best to get me deplatformed because you're asking questions, the answers of which are very difficult for people in power to accept. AIPAC is, of course, a lobby group, but it's a lobby group that's backed by powerful entities that are organized in a way that would suggest there's an enterprise behind the infrastructure. The level of pro-Israeli Zionist support throughout every fabric in American society is real. I mean, it's not artificial. People, whenever you bring that up, they say, well, you're anti-Semitic. And on the surface, that could be construed as anti-Semitism, because if we truly live in a country where it doesn't matter, who cares if the heads of the vast majority of American media companies are Jewish? Who cares if the heads of Hollywood studios that shape the perceptions of America through film are Jewish? Who cares if the heads of publishing houses, major publishing houses who decide what books to publish, which shape the minds of the American people, are Jewish and pro-Zionist to begin with? Who cares if academic institute? I mean, the bottom line is if it doesn't matter, if we truly live in a world where that doesn't matter, then yeah, to point it out would be anti-Semitic. But it does matter, and we know it matters. I mean, when Benjamin Netanyahu meets with social media, influencers and says we have to take over, we have to capture, we have to defeat the other side. In a nation that believes in free speech, he's talking about eradicating, deplatforming, silencing, people who speak out against him. When TikTok is sold to a pro-Israeli Zionist American Jew who basically says, I'm going to make sure that TikTok never criticizes Israel again. That ain't free speech. Now they're going after X, the same concept. I wrote an article that got a lot of attention, but got me in trouble. And I compared Israel to a parasitic bug that takes over the host. And I believe that that's an accurate assessment. But the parasitic bug has to make adaptations so that the host doesn't recognize what's happening. Because if the host recognizes what's happening, they kick the parasite out and kill it. I think right now we have a situation where the American host is woken up to the real danger of this pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli lobby. And that when you believe in a Make America Great Again or America First, and it becomes apparent that it's America Second and it's Make Israel Great Again, people start to kick out the parasite. The parasite's going to have to change, and this is where you're 100% correct. These aren't stupid people. I may not agree with them politically, but I respect the fact that these are smart people and they have a mission and they are singularly focused on accomplishing this mission. So there's a new reality being shaped today. So I agree with you. It's a very it's a situation that if you are, and here's the difficult thing, because how do you prevent going down the path of anti-Semitism? How do you prevent this conversation from becoming Jew hating? Um, this is a very dangerous conversation to have, not because it's a wrong conversation to have, but because if it's done improperly, could result in things that as an American I could never support. There's American Jewish communities all around me. There's synagogues where people pray. They have every right to pray and pray the way they want to pray. And I would give my life to defend their right to pray, just as I would give my life to defend the right of Muslims to pray in a mosque or Christians to pray in whatever church they want. I mean, look, you're Muslim, you know damn well in America we've turned on the Muslims in a horrific way, and we've treated the Muslims poorly, and we continue to do so. We have elected representatives who are talking about kicking all Muslims out of America as if that's the American thing to do. It's the most un-American thing to do. But we just have to be careful here, because we can be right in our motivations and wrong in our actions. And it's very important that as we seek to liberate ourselves from this Zionistic parasite, that doesn't get turned into all Jews are bad and things of that. Just like,
Absolutely not. Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I never, and most, in fact, if you look at pro-Palestinian protesters, all of them, without exception, respect Jewish people, respect their
correct.
faith, respect. I mean,
But
that's
I'm not
really
worried
what
about
Palestine.
the Palestinians. I'm not worried about the pro-Palestinians
Yeah,
protesters. I'm worried about mainstream Americans. That's what I'm
absolutely.
worried
I
about.
mean, mainstream media here has always really tried to shut down any, and this is a free speech issue as well, shut down anything that criticizes Israel or the Zionist project by conflating it with anti-Semitism. And
Yeah.
that's a tactic that they've been very successful in using, a card that they've used all the time to end careers, to, dox people, whatnot. So that's been happening, despite the fact that there are a significant number of Jewish people who are part of the pro-Palestinian movement.
Yeah. Imagine a Muslim version of Laura Loomer and how quickly everybody would turn this person and deplatform this person because of the criminality of their. But Laura Loomer is just out there smashing Muslims and Muslim Americans, and in a way that's just so flagrantly unconstitutional, it's not even funny. And yet she's like the mainstream, not mainstream America, but a large part of American society is like, yeah, Laura Loomer, good job. There's a, I forget who the politician is, or maybe she's running for Congress or she's in Congress, but I want to kick every Muslim out of America. That's her platform. Could you imagine? I mean, what if I said today, I'm running for Congress and the core of my platform is to kick every Jew out of America? Do you realize how quickly I'd be done? I mean,
Yeah.
gone. And yet she's out there, she's all over Twitter, the whole thing, because we do have a double standard here. Because again, we come down to who controls the narrative making in America. And it's the parasite, not the Jews, the parasite, the Zionists who control this, who dictate this. And the American host doesn't realize it yet. And then we're promoting hatred amongst the community. I've never had a problem with the American Muslim community in any capacity. I've been invited to speak at several of their annual gatherings. I meet with local imams. My dentist is a Muslim. We have fantastic conversations. I've never had a problem at all in terms of, first of all, every time, everyone I meet are so pro-American, it's not even funny. I mean, they love this country. They're in this country for a reason. And to sit there and demonize these people is just, it's my, are there bad apples in every tree? Yes. There are people there are Muslims in this country who say things that are indefensible. And just like there's Christians who say things that are indefensible and Jewish people who say things that are indefensible. But to condemn everybody for the words and deeds of a handful is crazy. But we have this double standard with the Islamic community that if there is an action of violence committed by Muslims, that suddenly all of you are capable of doing that. And yet we have school shootings done every day by Christian Americans, and nobody says, well, we should kick every Christian American out of here because they're all prone to violence. Well, we are prone to violence. We're a hell of a lot more prone to violence than the Muslim American community is. I'll tell you that much for sure. And I apologize for my language. I shouldn't be swearing in front of you, but I'm a little irritated right now. Not at you,
No,
but just as the
no, that
situation.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think one key here that is also true. You mentioned you've met a lot of Muslims and been to a lot of events, been invited to many of their, programs and stuff. And I think that's part of the equation as well. Is many people who are spewing this kind of hatred, you couldn't count how many Muslims they've actually met in their life. And they're consuming a lot of, because I think, especially with extremist rhetoric, you gave the example of Laura Loomer, or, there have been different cases like that as well, where many people will gravitate toward the extreme of an argument because it just sounds so different from everything else. It's like, oh, what if we just, endorse this radical approach to just like removing everyone, deporting everyone? That might just really solve all the problems that really we have internally. Even with Charlie Kirk's death, it's funny because even though the shooter and the perpetrator was a white person, somehow Muslims are still dragged into the conversation anyway. So it's like, that sounds like an internal problem. You should not be turning the conversation around, then, continuing to spew anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-minority rhetoric.
On the theory that it could have been a Muslim. Okay, it
Yeah,
wasn't a
it could have
Muslim,
been.
but it could have been a Muslim. Therefore, we must hold all Muslims accountable to the fact that it could have been a Muslim. I mean, that's their argument.
Yeah.
It's insanity and pure, unadulterated insanity. It's not directly related, but it's the same thing. I've been following Russophobia and the blind hatred of all things Russia that take place in America today, which has a strong parallel to what's going on with the Muslim community, rooted in ignorance, etc. Um, and the establishment promulgates all of this ignorance. But there were 3 CIA guys that got together for a panel a couple of years ago. Milt Bearden, um, Peter Clement, and I can't remember who the third one was. But all well-known uh, CIA guys, and they were talking about Russia and all this, and at the end of the day, they were like, we blame everything on Russia, but the bottom line is we did it to ourselves, and we're just using Russia as a scapegoat. And that was the reality of 3 guys who have been behind Russophobia and all this. The most honest thing they said is everything we're blaming the Russians for doing, they didn't do. We did it to ourselves, and we're blaming the Russians for it because we don't want to be honest about this. And I would say that this is the same truth that exists for the Islamic community. All of the problems that exist in America today, we did to ourselves. The Muslims didn't do these problems. They didn't bring it to us. We did it to ourselves. But we're not honest enough to look in the mirror and say, problem's here. What we do is we cast about and we say, she's wearing the scarf. She's different. She's the problem. Her.
Mhm.
People like her are the problem. They're different. They pray differently. And then we blame you. And then we start to believe the lies. And then the ignorant people who don't know any better, they go, well, that makes sense because it couldn't be us.
Yeah.
We couldn't be the ones responsible for all the problems we have. We have to blame them. So when America is saying this happened to us, it's happening not just to white people like me, white Christians, but Muslims and blacks. And it's happening to us collectively. And we should ask honest questions about why it's happening instead of looking for scapegoats. And I think the Muslim American community has been made a scapegoat, just like Russia has been made a scapegoat for problems that they have nothing to do with. They're just being blamed.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ritter. I really appreciate you coming on. Definitely always appreciate your valuable insights on a variety of issues. And I really want to thank you for coming on again.
All right, thanks. And hopefully we'll be able to talk again, but maybe after this conversation, I'll be deplatformed forever, so it won't matter.
Okay. Well, I hope not. I hope not. If you like what you see here at TMJ News, don't forget to like and share and subscribe to our channel for more weekly interviews. TMJ News is an independent grassroots media outlet, and you can find more ways to support us by reading the caption below. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and I hope you liked it.